The words shattered the silence of the opulent foyer like thunder as Alexander Hawthorne stormed through the double doors, his tailored suit rumpling slightly from the long board meeting, his green eyes flashing with fury, demanding to know what in God's name Elena was doing with his father, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers and polished oak floors that gleamed under the soft glow of evening lamps. Elena Thompson froze in place, her hands gently cradling Victor Hawthorne, the elderly patriarch whose frail form slumped against her in the velvet armchair where she had been offering him a tissue, wiping away the tears that streamed down his weathered cheeks, her heart racing as she tried to maintain composure in the face of this sudden confrontation. She had been seated there moments before, listening to Victor's quiet sobs about memories long buried, her uniform simple and starched, contrasting sharply with the room's lavish decor of gold-trimmed wallpapers, antique vases filled with fresh orchids that scented the air with a delicate floral aroma, and ornate rugs that muffled footsteps in this grand estate built on generations of wealth from investments in technology and real estate. Victor tried to lift a trembling hand, his voice weak and raspy as he murmured, "Son, wait, it's not." But Alexander cut him off abruptly, striding closer with purposeful steps, his face twisted in rage that seemed to stem from a mix of exhaustion and protectiveness, declaring that she thought she could just hold him like that as if she were family when she was merely the help. Elena, nothing more, his words laced with an assumption that stung deeply. Elena's brown eyes widened in surprise and hurt, but she held her ground firmly, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach from the unfair accusation, explaining that he was upset, Mr. Hawthorne, crying about something from the past, and she was just comforting him in a moment of vulnerability that no one else seemed to notice in this bustling household. Alexander's laugh came out bitter and sharp, like a blade cutting through the tension, mocking her notion of comforting when he had seen her with her arms around him, urging her not to play innocent because he had heard the whispers about maids like her getting too close to wealthy old men in hopes of a handout or some favor, the words hanging heavy in the air and piercing Elena's sense of dignity that she had built over years of hard work. The accusation felt like a deep wound, for Elena had come from a modest neighborhood where resilience was key, working her way through various jobs to support her siblings back home with remittances that kept their dreams alive. And she had been with the Hawthorns for 2 full years now, diligently cleaning rooms with meticulous care, preparing meals that catered to Victor's dietary needs, and lately keeping a watchful eye on him as his health declined with the passage of time, ensuring he took his medications and had company during lonely afternoons. But this moment, this misunderstanding, was a knife twisting into her hard-earned reputation, making her question if all her efforts had been in vain in a world that judged based on appearances and status. Before she could gather her thoughts to respond adequately, another voice slithered into the room, cool and composed like a calculated breeze. As Isabella Hawthorne descended the grand staircase with graceful poise, her silk gown flowing elegantly like water over her figure, a diamond necklace glinting under the chandelier lights that cast shimmering patterns on the walls. "Darling, I told you she was overstepping," she said smoothly, placing a manicured hand on Alexander's arm in a gesture that seemed supportive but carried an undercurrent of manipulation, "always lingering around your father and asking questions she has no business knowing." Her blue eyes fixing on Elena with a feigned pity that masked something sharper. Isabella's presence shifted the dynamics instantly, her words weaving a narrative that painted Elena as the intruder in this family sanctuary, suggesting the poor thing probably thinks she can climb the social ladder through such tactics, her tone dripping with condescension that made Elena's cheeks flush with restrained anger. Elena shook her head firmly, denying that it was not true, Mrs. Hawthorne. For Mr. Victor had called for her specifically, saying he needed someone to talk to in a house that often felt too large and empty despite its grandeur. Isabella waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away an insignificant concern, questioning whether it was talk or manipulation, noting how they had all seen her hover around unnecessarily, and now this making him cry. What exactly did she say to him to provoke such emotion, her questions probing like needles? Victor murmured weakly again, "No, Isabella, it's not her," his voice fading into the background noise of the ticking grandfather clock in the corner. But Alexander's temper flared brighter, overriding the plea. As in a blur of motion driven by misguided protectiveness, he stepped forward and grabbed Elena's arm roughly, pulling her away from his father with a force that conveyed his frustration, ordering her to get out, that she was fired, to pack her things and leave before he called security to escort her off the premises. The room seemed to spin for Elena in that instant, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes from the shock and injustice, but she refused to let them fall, holding on to her composure like a lifeline, for she had seen enough in this house over the months, the late-night arguments echoing through the halls, Victor's unexplained moments of distress that left faint marks on his arms, Isabella's secretive phone calls conducted in hushed tones behind closed doors that always ended with a satisfied smile. But now was not the time to fight back openly or reveal what she had observed, so she nodded once in quiet acceptance, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "As you wish, sir," the words tasting bitter on her tongue. As she turned to leave the foyer, her footsteps soft on the marble floor that reflected the opulent ceiling above, Victor reached out a shaky hand once more. "Elena, don't," his words trailing off into a cough that racked his thin frame, drawing attention back to him. Isabella quickly moved to his side with practiced efficiency, cooing softly, there, dear, let's get you to bed away from all this drama," her voice soothing on the surface, but Elena detected a hint of impatience beneath it. Alexander watched Elena walk away down the corridor, her steps measured and dignified despite the humiliation she had just endured, a twinge of doubt flickering in his chest like a small flame in the darkness, but he pushed it down resolutely, reminding himself that family came first always in the Hawthorne legacy. Hours later, alone in her small quarters at the edge of the estate where the manicured lawns gave way to wilder greenery, Elena packed her few belongings into a worn suitcase that had seen better days, the room sparse with just a single bed neatly made, a dresser holding her folded uniforms, and a window overlooking the gardens that bloomed vibrantly even in the fading light of dusk. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, replaying the scene in her mind over and over, the way Victor's tears had soaked her sleeve as he clung to her, his sobs not new to her, for she had witnessed them before late at night when Isabella was out attending social events, times when he spoke of regrets from his youth, of a beloved wife long gone whose memory haunted the halls, and whispers about secrets in the walls that he feared would never see the light. But today he had broken down completely, clutching her sleeve tightly and muttering about the poison in the tea, a phrase that echoed ominously in her thoughts now. Poison, it sounded like the ramblings of confusion at first. But Victor's eyes had been clear and desperate in that moment, pleading for understanding in a way that chilled her to the core. Elena glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking steadily as sunset approached, casting long shadows across the room and painting the walls in hues of orange and pink through the thin curtains. She could leave now without looking back, drive away in her old car to her previous life of simpler struggles, forget this gilded cage with its illusions of perfection and underlying tensions. But something held her back firmly, the image of Victor's frail hand reaching out for her in vain, the vulnerability in his gaze that no one else seemed to acknowledge. If she walked away from this place, who would be there to protect him from whatever shadows lurked within these walls, who would listen to his quiet pleas when the household turned a blind eye? With a deep breath to steady her nerves, she slipped out the back door quietly, avoiding the main house where lights were beginning to flicker on in preparation for dinner, making her way through the service entrance that she knew like the back of her hand. The estate was vast and sprawling with rolling lawns that stretched to a private lake shimmering under the twilight sky, hidden paths winding through flower beds and hedges that she had traversed countless times during her daily routines of tending to the household needs. She headed toward the old library, a room rarely used by the family but where Victor spent his afternoons lost in books that reminded him of better days, the door creaking open softly as she entered, dust motes dancing in the fading light that filtered through tall windows draped with heavy curtains. She scanned the shelves lined with volumes of history and literature, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination, and there behind a row of leather-bound classics that gathered dust from disuse was a small journal she had seen Victor hide once during one of their quiet conversations. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled it out carefully, the cover worn from frequent handling, and flipped through the pages filled with shaky handwriting that chronicled his innermost thoughts. The entries detailed his suspicions about changes to his routine, how Isabella seemed to alter his pills, making him forget important details, and her relentless push for control over the will that governed the vast Hawthorne fortune, words that painted a picture of quiet desperation. Elena's blood ran cold as the implications sank in, realizing this wasn't mere delusion but a genuine cry for help from a man trapped in his own home. As she pocketed the journal securely in her coat, footsteps echoed in the hall outside, approaching steadily, prompting her to duck behind a thick curtain just as Alexander entered the room, his face drawn with lines of worry that she hadn't noticed earlier. He paced back and forth across the Persian rug, muttering to himself, "What if I was wrong?" His voice laced with uncertainty that surprised her, stopping at the window to stare out into the gathering darkness, as if seeking answers from the stars beginning to emerge. Elena held her breath in the shadows, but he didn't notice her presence, eventually leaving with a heavy sigh that lingered in the air. When the door clicked shut behind him, she exhaled slowly, the journal burning like a secret fire in her pocket, knowing that this discovery was bigger than a simple misunderstanding and that she couldn't ignore it any longer. Slipping back to her car parked discreetly at the edge of the property, she drove off the estate grounds under the cover of night, the journals safe in her bag. But she wasn't leaving for good, not yet, for the truth was just beginning to unravel like a thread pulled from a tapestry, and Elena Thompson, the overlooked maid who had been dismissed so casually, was the only one willing to pull that thread until the whole picture emerged. That night, in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town where the neon sign flickered intermittently, Elena pored over the journal under the dim lamplight, her eyes scanning entry after entry that revealed Victor's growing fears about missing jewelry from family heirlooms, altered bank statements that didn't add up, and Isabella's late-night meetings with lawyers who arrived in sleek cars under the cover of darkness. "She's isolating me," one page read in Victor's quivering script. "No one believes an old man anymore," words that tugged at Elena's heartstrings and fueled her resolve to act. Her mind raced with possibilities and plans, recalling how she had noticed the subtle changes in Victor's demeanor, his increasing confusion that seemed to spike after certain meals, the locked doors to his study that restricted access even to close family, but she had attributed it all to the natural progression of age rather than something more sinister. Now it screamed of deliberate interference, a pattern of control that could not be ignored. By morning light filtering through the thin motel curtains, she had formulated a plan to gather more evidence, contacting an old friend who worked as a nurse in elder care facilities, someone she trusted from her community back home. "This sounds like financial exploitation mixed with potential neglect," the friend said over the phone with concern in her voice, advising to get solid evidence, but to be careful because these families have deep pockets and influence that can make things difficult. Elena nodded to herself in agreement, acknowledging the risks but undeterred, for she had faced challenges before in her life and emerged stronger. Returning to the estate under the cover of early morning fog that cloaked the landscape in mystery, she parked far away from the main entrance to avoid detection and snuck in through the service gate that led to the kitchens, her footsteps light on the dew-kissed grass. The kitchen was empty at this hour, the staff not due to arrive for another while, the counters pristine and the air still carrying the faint aroma of last night's dinner. She made her way swiftly to the security room tucked in a side corridor, using a code she had overheard from the guards during a casual conversation months ago, the monitors flickering to life with a soft hum as she accessed the system. Rewinding the footage from the past week with focused intensity, she watched in growing horror the scenes unfold, Isabella forcing pills down Victor's throat with a stern expression, yelling about signing the damn papers before it's too late, and once even raising her voice in frustration when he resisted her demands, the images confirming the journal's accounts in vivid detail. Elena copied the clips meticulously to a USB drive she had brought, her hands steady now with a sense of purpose that overrode any lingering fear. As she turned to leave the room, satisfied with the evidence gathered, the door opened unexpectedly, and Alexander stood there with eyes wide in astonishment, demanding to know what she was doing here after being told to leave. Elena held up the drive without hesitation, her voice firm as she declared she was saving his father, urging him to watch this and tell her if she was the enemy in all this. He hesitated for a moment, his expression a mix of confusion and curiosity, then took the drive from her hand, the first step toward uncovering the hidden truth that would change everything in the Hawthorne world forever, setting in motion a chain of events that would test loyalties, reveal long-buried secrets, and ultimately lead to a reckoning for the family and those who had been part of its intricate web. Alexander plugged the USB drive into his laptop with hands that trembled slightly from a mix of anger and disbelief, the screen illuminating his face in the dim security room as the footage began to play, revealing Isabella in moments of stark contrast to her public elegance, shoving Victor into a chair with forceful insistence, pouring liquor into his mouth until he coughed and spluttered in distress, whispering urgent threats about the family fortune that needed to be secured at all costs, her expressions shifting from calculated calm to impatient frustration that made Alexander's stomach churn with a growing sense of betrayal. Elena stood across from him quietly, arms crossed over her chest as she watched his reactions unfold, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of revelations that was about to upend the Hawthorne world. Knowing that this evidence was the key to unlocking the truth she had suspected for months, but lacked the power to pursue alone until now. As the clips looped through scenes of Isabella rifling through Victor's desk drawers late at night, forging his signature on legal documents with a practiced hand that suggested this was not her first time manipulating records, Alexander muttered under his breath that this couldn't be real, replaying a particularly damning segment where his wife adjusted Victor's medication bottles, swapping pills with a sly glance over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching, actions that aligned chillingly with the journal entries Elena had discovered earlier. The room felt smaller suddenly, the hum of the computer fan the only sound breaking the heavy silence as Alexander processed the implications, his world tilting on its axis, because he had married Isabella for her sophistication and her seamless integration into high society circles that bolstered his business deals, seeing her as a partner who stabilized his life after the untimely loss of his mother years ago in what had been deemed a natural heart condition, but now this footage painted her as a calculated force eroding the very foundation of his family from within. "Why didn't he tell me directly?" Alexander finally asked, his voice cracking with a vulnerability he rarely showed in boardrooms where he commanded billions in investments, turning to Elena, who responded softly that he had tried in subtle ways but she kept him sedated and isolated, while Alexander was always preoccupied with meetings and expanding the empire that bore the Hawthorne name across global markets. Guilt washed over him like a cold wave, making him slump into a nearby chair as he rubbed his temples in an attempt to ward off the headache building from the overload of information, realizing how his absences had created blind spots that Isabella exploited with ruthless efficiency. Elena's voice softened further as she pointed out that there was more to uncover, recalling how Victor had mentioned something cryptic about tea in his journal entries, linking it potentially to the circumstances surrounding Alexander's mother's passing, a topic that had always been shrouded in family lore as a tragic but unavoidable event. Alexander's head snapped up at that, his eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and dread as he demanded to know what she meant exactly, prompting Elena to explain that Victor's writings suggested the heart attack might not have been entirely natural, with Isabella present that fateful day overseeing the household routines including meal preparations. The accusation hung in the air like a thick fog, heavy and suffocating, as Alexander stood abruptly from his seat, declaring that he needed time to process, but if this held any truth then they had to dig deeper, instructing Elena to stay on the estate grounds for now and not leave until they sorted this out, his tone shifting from accusatory to one of reluctant alliance. As he stormed out of the room to confront Isabella directly, Elena exhaled a long-held breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, aware that she had just ignited a fire that could either illuminate the truth or consume everything in its path, but she was committed now to seeing it through for Victor's sake. Isabella was in the greenhouse when Alexander found her amidst the vibrant blooms of exotic plants that she tended as a hobby to project an image of refined leisure, clipping roses with precise snips of her gardening shears that echoed softly in the glass-enclosed space filled with the earthy scent of soil and petals. "We need to talk right now," he said in a low voice that brooked no argument, holding up his phone where he had transferred a snippet of the footage for immediate playback, watching her face pale dramatically before hardening into a mask of denial as she claimed that the maid must have faked it all in a desperate bid to get back at them for her dismissal. Alexander shook his head firmly, insisting that he had viewed the originals directly from the security system and demanded an explanation without delay, his stance unyielding as he pressed her on the scenes of medication, tampering and document forgery that could not be easily dismissed as fabrications. Isabella's eyes darted around the greenhouse as if seeking an escape route among the trellises and hanging baskets, her composure cracking slightly as she stepped closer with a silky voice attempting to soothe, explaining that Victor was simply senile and she was merely helping him by administering his treatments for his own good to manage his declining health, while the papers were just protective measures for their shared future against potential legal challenges from distant relatives. "Our future or solely yours?" Alexander countered sharply, his suspicion deepening with every evasive word she uttered, refusing to back down as he recalled the loving partnership he thought they had built over the years of attending galas and negotiating deals together. She leaned in with a pleading expression, urging him to think rationally about how Victor's fading memory was holding them back from modernizing the family holdings, and that Elena was the real opportunist stirring trouble to secure some financial gain or position within the household. But the seeds of doubt had taken firm root in Alexander's mind, watered by the undeniable evidence on the screen, leading him to leave her standing there fuming amidst the flowers as he returned to Victor's suite where the elderly man was resting under soft blankets, stirring awake when Alexander sat beside him gently. "Dad, tell me the full truth about Isabella and about Mom," he implored with a softened tone, watching Victor's eyes fill with unshed tears as he confessed that she had changed gradually after the loss of Alexander's mother, pushing him relentlessly to rewrite the will in ways that favored her control over the assets, and that he harbored suspicions about the heart attack not being mere coincidence given Isabella's increasing influence at the time. "Proof?" Alexander asked urgently, prompting Victor to point weakly toward a hidden safe concealed behind a family portrait on the wall, its combination whispered like a long-guarded secret. Inside the safe lay a collection of medical records from years past, showing unexplained anomalies in the toxicology report of his late wife's system, alongside notes documenting Isabella's discreet purchases of sedatives that were hard to trace through regular channels, materials that could subtly exacerbate a pre-existing heart condition without raising immediate alarms. Alexander felt a wave of nausea at the discovery, realizing that the Hawthorne Trust, the charitable foundation worth billions that funded educational programs and medical research across communities, might have been compromised as well, with Isabella holding a board position where she could subtly shift funds to personal accounts disguised as operational expenses. He called Elena into the room immediately, acknowledging her role in bringing this to light, and together they began piecing together a strategy, deciding to engage a discreet lawyer, specializing in family and estate matters, to review the documents without alerting Isabella prematurely. Over the ensuing days that blurred into a tense routine of secrecy and investigation, they built a comprehensive case with Elena's insider knowledge proving invaluable, as she highlighted discrepancies in the household financial logs such as unexplained withdrawals that coincided with Isabella's luxury purchases, sums that were siphoned under the guise of maintenance costs for the estate's vast properties. They enlisted a private investigator through anonymous channels, a professional who delved into digital trails and uncovered a series of emails between Isabella and a shadowy financier known for facilitating discreet asset transfers, messages that outlined plans to sell off family heirlooms like rare artworks and antique collections under the radar to offshore buyers willing to pay premium prices without questions. One stormy night, as rain pattered relentlessly against the tall windows of the study, casting rivulets of water that distorted the view of the gardens outside, Elena and Alexander pored over stacks of printed documents spread across the mahogany desk illuminated by desk lamps, cross-referencing the emails with bank statements that showed irregular patterns of deposits into accounts linked indirectly to Isabella's name. "Why are you helping me like this?" Alexander asked during a brief pause. "Looking up from the papers with genuine curiosity after what I did earlier, accusing you wrongly and handling the situation poorly with my initial reaction." Elena met his gaze steadily, her response measured and sincere because it's the right thing to do, and Victor deserves to live his remaining years in peace without fear or manipulation clouding his days, her words forging a fragile bond between them built on mutual respect that had been absent before. But Isabella sensed the shifting atmosphere in the household, the subtle changes in how staff interacted with her and the increased whispers behind closed doors, leading her to corner Elena one afternoon in the pantry where shelves were lined with neatly organized supplies and the air smelled of spices and fresh produce. "You think you can turn him against me with your little schemes?" she hissed in a low voice that carried veiled warnings, promising to ruin Elena's reputation by spreading stories that would make it impossible for her to find work anywhere in the city or beyond, her eyes flashing with a determination to protect her position. Elena stood tall without flinching, replying that she could try, but the truth would always speak louder than fabrications, her confidence stemming from the solid evidence they had amassed. Isabella's threats only escalated from there, culminating in attempts to tamper with the security system to erase footage and destroy paper trails. But Elena had anticipated such moves and created multiple backups stored securely off-site. When Alexander finally presented the full dossier to Isabella in a private confrontation in the drawing room surrounded by family portraits that seemed to judge the unfolding drama, she initially denied everything vehemently, but under the weight of the compiled proof, her facade cracked, admitting partial involvement by claiming she did it all for their shared benefit to streamline the family's resources and eliminate what she saw as outdated burdens, holding them back from greater prosperity. The police were summoned discreetly that evening, arriving in unmarked vehicles to avoid alerting the media prematurely, and Isabella was taken into custody on charges of fraud and mistreatment of a vulnerable individual, her departure from the estate marked by a stoic silence that masked her inner turmoil. Yet, even as the immediate threat receded, the investigation peeled back deeper layers, revealing that Isabella's actions were motivated by her own family's lingering debts from failed ventures. Debts she sought to erase by tapping into the Hawthorne wealth through any means necessary. Alexander, feeling the foundations of his life shaken to the core, initiated a full audit of the foundation's operations to root out any lingering irregularities, with Elena staying on not just as Victor's caregiver but as a trusted advisor in the process, her role evolving from peripheral to central in the household dynamic. The estate, once a symbol of unassailable prestige, now breathed with a tentative sense of renewal, its halls echoing with plans for transparency and reform, yet whispers of a larger conspiracy persisted as the financier's name surfaced repeatedly in the emails hinting at connections to influential networks that extended beyond personal gain into broader schemes of influence peddling. Elena uncovered a hidden letter tucked away in Victor's safe during a final sweep of his personal effects, its contents warning to beware the shadow board they know about the buried funds and will stop at nothing to protect their interests, a revelation that signaled the fight was far from concluded, but merely entering a new phase where the hidden truths threatened to engulf the entire Hawthorne legacy in a battle for integrity and justice that would test their resolve like never before. With Isabella securely behind bars awaiting her formal charges that loomed like a gathering storm over the once impenetrable Hawthorne legacy, the estate should have exhaled in collective relief, allowing its grand halls to fill with a sense of tentative peace after months of underlying tension, but instead an undercurrent of unease persisted like a subtle hum vibrating through the marble floors and ornate ceilings, as Alexander immersed himself deeply into the intricate records of the family foundation, poring over ledgers and digital archives that revealed a web of embezzlement extending far beyond his wife's isolated schemes to encompass a network of complicit board members who had quietly profited from diverted donations meant for community upliftment programs across underserved areas. Elena, now officially recognized as Victor's dedicated personal aide, with a role that granted her access to sensitive discussions, assisted proactively in these audits. Her sharp, analytical eye-spotting patterns of irregularity, such as funds earmarked for educational scholarships being funneled into private investment vehicles disguised as administrative fees, actions that eroded the very mission of the Hawthorne Trust, which had been established decades ago to foster innovation in technology, education for young minds from diverse backgrounds. "This isn't merely isolated theft," Alexander remarked one late afternoon in the sunlit boardroom, where sunlight streamed through floor to ceiling, windows casting golden hues on polished conference tables. "It's embedded in the structure itself. Look here, how grants for local hospitals were rerouted to luxury retreats for select donors, creating a cycle of favoritism that undermined public trust." Alexander nodded grimly in agreement, acknowledging the depth of the corruption and noting that the shadow board Victor had vaguely referenced in his earlier confessions appeared to be pulling strings from afar, influencing decisions through back-channel communications that prioritized personal gains over philanthropic goals. Anonymous messages began arriving shortly thereafter, delivered via encrypted emails, and unmarked letters slipped under doors, warning of potential consequences if the internal investigations continued. Phrases like "cease your inquiries" or "face repercussions" that hinted at deeper protections afforded by influential figures unwilling to see their arrangements dismantled. Victor, regaining a measure of his former vitality under Elena's attentive care, which included balanced nutrition plans and gentle exercise routines, shared additional insights during their daily walks in the estate's expansive gardens, where blooming flowers provided a serene backdrop to heavy conversations, revealing that his late wife had suspected similar manipulations before her passing, prompting her to conceal the master ledger, a comprehensive tome that chronicled the foundation's transactions from its inception, now unearthed from a sealed vault beneath the wine cellar's stone floors. its pages yellowed but meticulously detailed, exposing decades of ethical dealings gradually tainted by recent diversions. They pored over this ledger in focused sessions, cross-referencing entries with modern bank records to trace the flow of misappropriated funds. Elena suggesting they engage independent forensic accountants to validate their findings, professionals who arrived discreetly and worked in a secured wing of the estate, mapping out digital footprints that led to offshore entities controlled by the shadow board. Meanwhile, Elena's own life underwent a profound transformation as the staff, once distant or cautious, now approached her with newfound respect, sharing anecdotes of their own experiences under Isabella's stringent oversight, such as suppressed reports of inventory shortages that masked unauthorized sales of estate artifacts. One gardener even confided in a quiet moment by the fountain that Isabella had once warned him against mentioning unusual deliveries of unmarked packages, actions that now seemed part of a larger pattern of concealment. Elena organized informal gatherings for the employees in the communal lounge, a space previously underutilized, fostering an environment where voices could be heard without fear of reprisal, discussing ways to improve daily operations and ensure transparency in household management initiatives that built a culture of openness and mutual support within the estate's walls. Alexander, drawing inspiration from these changes, proposed sweeping reforms to the foundation's governance structure, including the implementation of transparent voting mechanisms for project approvals and mandatory community input, sessions for grant allocations, measures designed to prevent future lapses and restore the organization's reputation in the public eye. But opposition mounted swiftly as word of the audits leaked through discreet channels, prompting Senator Hale, a prominent figure with ties to the foundation's historical donors, to initiate legal action, filing a lawsuit for defamation, claiming the emerging accusations were baseless smears orchestrated to destabilize long-standing partnerships that had benefited countless initiatives over the years. The trial date was set rapidly in the bustling city courthouse, a venue known for its impartial proceedings, yet buzzing with media interest as reporters gathered outside, speculating on the fallout for one of the region's most influential families. Elena prepared meticulously for her testimony, reviewing timelines and evidence with Alexander during evening sessions in the library, surrounded by shelves of historical volumes that seemed to echo the weight of legacy, reviewing potential cross-examination questions that might challenge her credibility based on her former position in the household. "They won't hesitate to question your perspective given your background," she noted one night as candlelight flickered, casting warm shadows across the room. But Alexander reassured her that her insights were invaluable precisely because they came from an unfiltered viewpoint, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder in a gesture that spoke of growing trust. The courtroom itself was a hive of activity on the day of the hearing, packed with observers from various sectors, including foundation beneficiaries who had traveled to show solidarity, their presence a testament to the broader impact of the foundation's work, now at risk of being overshadowed by scandal. Elena took the stand first, her posture composed and voice clear, as she detailed the patterns of mistreatment she had observed firsthand, weaving in the financial discrepancies that linked Isabella's actions to broader board involvement. The prosecutor guiding her through exhibits of altered ledgers and email chains that illustrated the collusion. The defense attempted to undermine her narrative, probing as a former household staff member. "How could you possibly grasp the complexities of high-level financial operations?" To which Elena replied with unwavering calm that numbers and patterns reveal themselves regardless of one's title, and that ethical lapses are evident to anyone willing to look closely enough. Her words resonating through the room and drawing nods from the jury. Victor followed her on the stand, his testimony delivered with a quiet dignity that belied his frailty, recounting personal anecdotes of coerced decisions and overlooked warnings, emphasizing that the foundation was his wife's enduring dream, a beacon for progress that deserved protection from those who sought to exploit it for selfish ends. Alexander closed the prosecution's case with a comprehensive overview of the evidence, presenting bank statements, digital correspondence, and the master ledger as irrefutable proof of the conspiracy, his delivery measured yet passionate, underscoring the need for accountability to preserve the family's philanthropic mission. The jury deliberated for several intense days, during which the estate became a hub of quiet anticipation, with staff and family alike sharing meals and conversations that strengthened their collective resolve. But the verdict, when announced, was unanimous, finding guilt on all counts of fraud and conspiracy, a decision that sent ripples through the assembled crowd and beyond. Judge Rowley, in her closing remarks, acknowledged the thoroughness of the presentation and ordered sentencing to follow within a month, mandating interim restrictions on the defendant's financial activities to prevent further harm. In the immediate aftermath, as media outlets reported the outcome with headlines highlighting the fall of entrenched figures like Senator Hale, who faced not only prison time but a lifetime ban from public office, Alexander renamed a dedicated wing of the estate, the Thompson Center, in honor of Elena's pivotal contributions, a space repurposed for community workshops on ethical leadership and financial literacy programs that extended the foundation's reach. Elena ascended to the position of co-director overseeing initiatives focused on elder support and anti-corruption education, her expertise shaping policies that emphasized inclusivity and oversight drawing from her own experiences to advocate for voices often marginalized in such settings. Victor, in one of his clearer moments during a family gathering in the sunroom where light poured in through glass panes, gifted her a cherished family heirloom ring engraved with symbols of resilience, whispering that she was the guiding light the Hawthorns had needed to navigate through the darkness. As spring unfolded with gentle warmth enveloping the grounds, Elena walked alongside Alexander through the rejuvenated gardens, where new plantings symbolized fresh starts, discussing future expansions of the foundation's outreach to international partners. He remarked that together they had constructed something enduring from the remnants of deception, a legacy redefined through integrity and collaboration. She smiled in agreement, noting that the journey had taught them the value of vigilance and empathy, turning toward the horizon where the estate stood as a beacon, not of untouchable wealth, but of principled progress, the hidden truths fully illuminated, and the path ahead cleared for generations to come in a narrative of redemption and renewal that echoed far beyond the estate's boundaries.